Welcome to the Red Sneaker Writers Podcast. News, interviews, and writing tips for people who are serious about having a writing career and want some practical knowledge to help them achieve it. Your host is the nationally best-selling author of more than 50 books, William Bernhardt.
Hello, Red Sneaker Writers. This episode goes out on October 19, 2020. My interview guest for this podcast is Pierce Gaynor, who's one of the two co-founders of Fictional. That's Fixional, an AI software website that allows you to upload manuscripts for review. You can do 1 if you're an author, you can do 100 if you're a publisher, and not only does it review them for things like grammar and spelling, what you might expect, but also will comment and evaluate it based on things like consistency, clarity, originality. I mentioned this program in the last podcast, along with a lot of other new software innovations of interest to writers, and I got a lot of feedback from people wanting to know more about it, but I didn't hear from anyone who's actually used it. So A, I tried it out myself, and B, I contacted Fictional to see if somebody could talk to me. So that's how this happened, and Pierce was very gracious and agreed to talk to me for a little while about this program. So that's what you have to listen to later in this podcast. Let me also mention that there is still space in my December online small group workshop. People who are looking for some feedback on those manuscripts they've been working on, or at least started during the lockdown period, here's a chance to get 5 days of feedback, at least 4 hours a day, small group and individual, focusing on what you need, your problems, your manuscript, and topics of interest selected by the people in the group. So if that would interest you, please visit my website, williambernhardt.com, and sign up. There's so much news in the air right now that I'm going to skip the writing tips portion of the podcast, but I promise you it'll be back next time. And now, the news. As I've already mentioned last time around, I talked about a lot of new innovations in the world of software, apps, websites, computer-based or AI-based things that could, at least purportedly, help writers with their work. But there's one I missed, and several of you let me know about this program or service called Writer. Just what you'd think it is, W-R-I-T-E-R. Their website is writer.com. You wondered what lucky person got or perhaps paid for that URL. Now you know. And this is a program that does many things, some more amazing than others, at least according to their website. Again, this is not an endorsement. I haven't used it, but certainly it seems to point out with the squiggly line you might be familiar with from programs like Microsoft Word, whenever you've misspelled a word or written something awkward or used a clumsy phrase. But here's the kicker. It will also point out when you've used a word or phrase or even in a passage that's what they call loaded, which may mean it has content or connotations, insinuations that you may not be intending. And one level, that might just mean that it's a phrase that's too formal or not formal enough or outdated. But what it also purports to do is flag when you're indicating bias or when you're having a tone that might be offensive to someone. We've talked on previous podcasts about many writers who've gotten into serious trouble, not intending it, I think in most cases, but nonetheless putting out books or even book cover copy, advertising copy that some took to be racist or cultural appropriation. Well, Writer has raised a bunch of money, and now they're letting people know that this program will detect insensitive language, things that might offend others. Again, haven't used it, but it's an interesting concept. I think beta readers and getting feedback from real people people who might be involved is probably still the best thing. If you're writing about a certain group of people or race or religion, get some people from that group to give you feedback. But if you can't do that, whether you are particularly into political correctness or not, this might conceivably be a way to head off some of those problems. Another follow-up to a previous story, it's a couple podcasts ago, I talked about the highly credited gossip, I guess we'll call it, indicating that Bertelsmann, which is the big mega corporation that owns Penguin Random House, was in talks to buy another one of the big five publishers, Simon Schuster. And a couple of you asked, why would they want to? They're already the largest publisher in the English-speaking world. They've got a big market share. They got enough books. Why would they want more? Well, for more insight on that question, I'm going to send you to The Scholarly Kitchen. That's the name of the website. They've got an article by a commentator named Joseph Esposito who discusses this at length. He says, what probably you already suspected, that part of it is trying to command enough of a market share to have enough clout that they can fend off Amazon. But also, part of it is relates to their negotiations with authors and basically putting pressure on other partners, which might be other people than authors, but this is the Red Sneaker Podcast. We care about authors. They're talking about authors allowing it, to quote Esposito, shore up its margins. In other words, to let them get away with taking larger percentages so that they can deal with Amazon. Here's a quote from the article, quote, "Publishers have succeeded over the past 2 decades in reaping 100% of the efficiencies from digital media and workflows and shared none of that with authors. This will continue," end quote. You can read it for yourself, but what I think he's saying is that all the traditional justifications for publishers keeping the vastly lion's share of the profits, 85% and up, has been the costs of printing and warehousing and distributing. But most of those are not relevant with eBooks. And some publishers have increased the percentages they pay for authors on eBooks, but not nearly enough. And this may indicate another publisher justification for this position that traditional publishing has taken. Any of you members of book clubs? Do you read for book clubs? You probably don't have time if you're a Red Sneaker writer and using your spare time to write, but a lot of people are in book clubs. So here's 2 interesting pieces of news on that. One, there's a brand new publishing startup company which calls itself, you guessed it, Book Club, as one word smushed together with 2 capitals. It's a platform that's basically designed to help you, the author, create and run your own online book club, which sounds like a pretty good idea. And they've been raising money to ramp up to do this. And of course, anytime there's a new good idea out there, Amazon won't be far behind. So guess what? Amazon's also rolling out a new book club feature. In fact, some of you, if you go to Amazon frequently, you, like me, may have seen prompts asking if you would like to join a book club. Well, click on them or in their search engine, put in book club, and you'll find a page where they invite you to either join or create a book club. Basically the same thing Book Club, the new platform startup, is doing. Why would you want to do that? Just because you're lonely? Just because you have spare time to burn? Probably not. I think the reason to do it would be for promotion, to get your name out there, to get more people aware of what you're doing. And that might not be a bad idea if you can find something that relates to what you're doing, the kind of books you're writing. If I were going to do it, and I'm not probably, but if I were going to do it, I suppose I'd have a legal thriller book club for fans of legal thrillers. Of course, I couldn't have the assigned reading every month be my books, Although at this point, with 54 books in print, I think that could actually go for a long time. But no, you couldn't do that. That would be boring and egomaniacal. And gosh, writers never have an ego. So you'd maybe do that once. And then you'd have a Perry Mason novel or a book by, what's that guy's name? John... Oh, Grisham, that's what I'm trying to think of. Yeah, that guy. Or Scott Turow. Or someone like that. Force them to read those people, which would not be painful. And, of course, that could boomerang. People might start reading those and not want to read me anymore. I'm falling less in love with this idea the more I talk about it. But anyway... If you're interested in starting a book club to help promote your career, there's 2 ways of doing it. Okay, fair's fair. I mentioned Amazon. Now let me mention Barnes & Noble. Except there's not much to say here, except they've been hacked. Yes, you heard me right. They have been hacked. Although they emphasize that there has been, quote, no compromise of payment card or other such financial data, end quote. But it seems a lot of other customer data has been accessed, and you can only wonder what the hacker wanted to do with that. In fact, apparently this hack interfered with the operation of Nooks. As I'm sure you know, Nooks are the ebook reader that is generated by Barnes & Noble, and I think you can read anything, but also can read Nook books. Anyway, customers who used those over the weekend complained about problems they had accessing ebooks that they'd purchased or wanted to purchase. And at some point they had problems buying books, and apparently this is all related to the hacking. But Barnes & Noble has said they expect Nook to be working fully again. It probably will be by the time you're listening to this podcast, but still... interesting and more than a little disturbing. Okay, here's some good news. According to Barbara Marcus, who, of course, is the president and publisher of Random House Children's Book, children's book sales are up 4% over the last 5 years. Well, that's an increase, and that's better than a decrease. It's not a huge increase, 4% spread over 5 years. But it does mean that people are still reading children's books. And, of course, in the past year, once COVID-19 hit, sales increased about 15%. Now, to be sure, a lot of those books are going to be exactly what you would expect them to be, Dr. Seuss and whatnot. But according to Marcus, there's also increased sales for some new authors, particularly, and pay attention to this, particularly for books about, quote, empathy, books that feature diverse characters, and, of course, workbooks and educational materials, things that have become increasingly popular because a lot of children are learning and schooling at home during the lockdown, so you would expect that to go up. Interesting, though, empathy, diverse characters, which I'm going to think probably means racially, culturally, perhaps religiously diverse. So take this article, write the children's book you want, and then combine it with writer to make sure you're not offending anyone with your diverse characters. And maybe this will be a sweet spot, and this will be your chance to get into the children's book market. One last article, and thanks to Jane Friedman for pointing this out, that exactly 5 years ago, in October of 2015, the New York Times printed an article that gets talked about a lot since, but it was an article celebrating the decline of ebooks. Print is here to stay, they said, and basically they treated ebooks as a fad that was already dying. Well, the New York Times is a very respected newspaper with fine investigative reportage and many Pulitzers to its name, but it's possible that when it comes to books, they may be too attached to the new